All right, hello there, thrill seekers and seekers of adventure and excitement. That was, of course, Pipeline, originally by a California band called the Shantays, but I learned it from the version by the Ventures. When I was like 15 years old, I owned a copy of, I think it was like the Ventures' Greatest Hits. It was this album with an orange cover and a girl in an orange bikini on the cover that folded out, and you could look at the whole girl in there. And I learned it from that version when I was about 15 years old, and we played it in the first band I had when I was in high school, only I never learned it correctly. I never learned the whole song all the way through. So for today's video, I learned the whole song all the way through for the first time in my life after all those years. But I don't want to talk too much about Pipeline, even though I'd love to talk about Pipeline all day. I want to talk about whether or not Zen is a cult, because I've devoted my life to this stuff, and it does concern me whether or not what I've devoted my life to is a cult. And there was an interesting comment left on, I don't know if it was the previous video I just did or the one before that, but one or the other, and it goes like this. I'm going to read it to you. Brad, after I read Shobogenzo, that's Dogen's masterwork, and Eat, Sleep, Sit, which is the book I've been talking about for the last couple days, and Stephen Hassan's BITE model and Professor Robert Lifton's 8 components of thought reform, which I never heard of those, but there you go, I came to a harsh discovery. That discovery was that Dogen's Shobogenzo and the current Eiheiji described in Eat, Sleep, Sit both meet the BITE model, B-I-T-E model, and Lifton's 8 components of thought reform model. So, I'm not saying Eiheiji is a cult compound, but Eiheiji is a cult compound, and it always has been. And here's the evidence he puts forth. Here we go. Number 1. Not one moment to think for oneself, and every human act being ritualized. Even one's sleep position is mandated, and what one thinks about before sleeping. That is true. You're supposed to sleep only on your right side. They can't really force you to think about certain things before sleeping, but they do tell you should, I forget what you're supposed to concentrate on before sleeping, but they do have a recommendation. Number 2, violence. Number 3, sleep deprivation, getting up at 2 a.m. to study. Actually, they get up at 1:30 sometimes. Number 4, high carbohydrate diet and malnutrition is very common in cults. Number 5, mind-stopping exercises, and he puts in parentheses, zazen rituals. Number 6, stripping of identity. Number 1, they changed his name, so whenever you enter into a monastic life, you get a new name, which in Japan is they just take your original first name, and this is hard to explain for people who don't understand Japanese, but the Japanese language is written in Chinese characters, and the pronunciation of those characters is flexible. So when you enter Eiheiji, and I think pretty much any other Zen monastery in Japan, they start reading your name in the Chinese style rather than the Japanese style. That's the name change. Number 7, stripping of identity. Number 2, shaving of hair. Number 8, making common actions inordinately complex and then punishing them for mistakes. Punishing them means the monks, for mistakes, so that no one can even use the toilet without fear. That's probably taking it a little too far, but yeah, okay, I'll concede that's maybe slightly over, but yeah. Number 9, making everyone wear the same clothes. That's certainly true. Number 10, making it very difficult to escape. There is this great passage in Eat, Sleep, Sit which tells how difficult it is for a trainee to escape from Eiheiji, because everybody in the town kind of is aware of this phenomenon of people kind of trying to just run away from Eiheiji, and they basically snitch on you to Eiheiji, and they go and get you. He makes a big case for how hard it is to escape. Well, these points are in weird order because it goes back to number 7 again, verbal abuse. Number 8 again, many of the rules for dealing with superiors can cause physical discomfort that one has to endure. Example, you get an itch somewhere and you cannot scratch it until your senior is done with you. Number 9, you have no input as to your roles after the initial period. Every job is handed to you like in the military. Number 10, it's their way or the highway. One cannot even defend oneself from physical blows. There goes I just put a sun umbrella up, and it just fell over, so I'll have to go get that later. Number 11, 2 of his class had to go to the hospital because the conditions were so bad. I think it's more than 2. Number 12, no access to newspapers, TV, or any outside media or letters. And then he goes on to say, the problem I have with this, I honestly don't think Soto Zen would have survived without Dogen making it into a cult. This troubles me because that could mean that cult creation could be considered, and he puts shudder in parentheses, right action. Thud, thud, thud. I'm not sure what the thud, thud, thud represents, but I kind of get the sentiment. So yeah, this is a big question about monastic Zen. And as I said, the type of Zen that I practiced and that I studied and that I write about was not monastic Zen. So there's maybe I should make a whole video about the distinction between the two. But I never did this monastic stuff, and I was always suspicious of it. And the only sort of, the closest I've ever come to doing monastic type Zen is that about 10 years ago, I think, probably 10, maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, 12, I started going to Tassajara every summer as what they call a work practice student. So I wasn't enrolled in what they call their practice periods, which is what they would consider really hardcore monk training type stuff. But I did go to their summer work practice things in which there are paying guests who are kind of using Tassajara as a resort, but there is also a monk's schedule going alongside of that, and the monks do service for the people who are staying there as a resort. So I did that. And I tell you, every darn time I was there, I went through this whole process that this guy describes in his comment. Probably not in exactly those words, but I would be like, this is a cult. This is definitely a cult. This is something wrong here. Everything has gone wonky. This is a cult. And let me tell you, the Tassajara during the summer is about as light a version, L-I-T-E, a version of monastic practice as you could ever want in the Zen world, meaning it's nowhere near as harsh as what they do at Eiheiji. It's probably not as harsh as what they did at Mount Baldy when Mount Baldy was functioning as a monk training center. It's probably not as harsh as most Japanese, certainly not as difficult as Antaiji, which I would say in Japan is one of the easier. I don't want to say Antaiji is easy because Muho watches these videos and he might get mad, but it's definitely a lot less strict standing Eiheiji or any place like that. And then Tassajara is miles milder than that. And I was sitting there going, this is a cult, this is a cult, this is terrible. And I would have conversations with people there about this, particularly my friend Greg Fain. He would say, it's not a cult because anybody can leave at any time, which is true. That is a big difference. Now, there is that thing of Eiheiji where the people in the very initial stages of training, there's a lot of stuff made to make it nearly impossible for them to run away. But the difference is that doesn't last. That only lasts for like I said in the last video, I'm not clear on the timeline. Let's say a month, maybe 2 or 3 months at the most. There is a period where you can't get out. I'm going to say it's probably about a month. But like I say, the timeline is a little wonky in there, so it's hard to tell. But anyway, it's a short time, and then after you've gone past this initial training period, then you're free to come and go as you want. And if you want to just quit one day, nobody's going to stop you. In fact, in Zen, there's a bigger danger of getting kicked out than there is a danger of being forced to stay. And I would say this probably goes across the board. There may be some outlier, weird, culty Zen temples or whatever, monasteries that call themselves Zen out there who won't let you leave. I don't know. But for mainstream type Zen that we're talking about, me and you on this video channel, no, that isn't what happens. As I say, you're much more likely to be kicked out than to be forced to stay. Another thing is, and I've been watching this show, I just watched the first episode called Stay Sweet, and it's a Netflix show. Maybe I'll review it. It's interesting. It's about a Mormon-based cult. And one of the things I noticed about that and other cult documentaries and books and things I've read is cults tend to be very bound up in trying to create like the family is involved. So it's not just monks going there individually. It's family groups. If you could at Jonestown or this cult that's in Stay Sweet or the Rajneeshis or all these other people, there's always this idea of trying to form a full-on society. In Zen, you're not trying to do that. You're training monks to do a certain thing that they're going to do. So that's a big difference. The other thing is, in addition to the not being allowed to leave thing, the expectation in Zen is that this kind of hardcore training is a temporary thing. It is a training period that lasts for a certain time and is over. So it's not that you're going to go and your entire life is going to be lived in these kind of circumstances, which is another hallmark of a cult. Your whole life is kind of surrounded by this kind of cult behavior, and then your death too if you drink the flavor aid like the Jonestown. Did you know that the people in Jonestown, Jim Jones didn't even when everybody's going to commit suicide, he was such a cheapskate that he bought off-brand Kool-Aid. So when they say drank the Kool-Aid, it wasn't even Kool-Aid, it was like flavor aid or fake Kool-Aid. So adding insult to injury, I always think that's just one detail of that story that makes me go, oh my God, you went all the way with this, like all the way into horribleness. But anyway, another aside. So my conclusion is that even though they use a lot of techniques and things that are similar to what cults do, it's not a cult. But the reason I have never done this sort of practice, one of the main reasons, is because it is a little too much like a cult for me. It's too much like a cult for me to trust it. So personally, this guy sitting here, I don't trust that kind of training. I see it as a step in a wrong direction. That's how I see it for myself. But I don't want to repudiate it and point fingers at it and call it a cult, because, as I said, it's not a permanent thing. It's only for the individual who actually signs up for it, who voluntarily says, I want this type of thing. And it's not a lifestyle thing. It's not supposed to go on for your whole life. That you go out and you do this stuff as a form of training, and then you leave and you do something else. And once you're gone, as Nonomura-san says in the book, the real training begins when there's nobody holding it over. I think the idea of it is for a person who lacks discipline to learn discipline. So if you're a person who can't discipline themselves, then you go for a time to a place that imposes discipline on you, and thereby hopefully you learn how to discipline yourself once that is taken away. That, I think, is what the idea of this training is. It's not to always hold this kind of cult-like, Jim Jones type discipline over you for the rest of your life. That's not what it's supposed to be there for. So that's my conclusion. And I don't think it's a cult. I do think that in some ways it does resemble a cult. And I'm not going to defend it because, as I said, that's the reason I didn't go into that form of Zen. But here's the other thing. That's not the only form of Zen there is. That's not the only way to do Zen. It never has been. There has always been a parallel tradition along with it that is much more open, much more gentle, doesn't involve anybody kicking you or hitting you or forcing you to get up at any particular time of day, etc., etc. That has always been alongside of it as a parallel track. So the track that gets the most attention is the monastic track, where everything is forced and regimented, and people can write a book like Eat, Sleep, Sit about it, and also all that kind of stuff. And then there's the tradition that I learned, and that a lot of others have learned, which was almost nothing like that. Really, almost nothing like that. I mean, Tim never told me, Nishijima Roshi never told me when to get up. I mean, when we did retreats, we had to get up at a certain time, but that was retreats. But, in regular life, no. Nobody ever hit me. People, the other thing is, eventually I'm going to have to do a video on the Kyosaku. God, I'm losing my ability to pronounce Japanese. It is a stick that's used to... it's the stick they hit you with in Zen, and I haven't been talking about that, but a lot of the commenters assume I've been talking about the Kyosaku stick, and that's a whole other thing. But anyway, I've never, neither of my teachers used it, so I never got hit like that. There was none of that was ever going on, so it was a different sort of thing. So there are different kinds of Zen. So I would say, number one, Zen is not a cult in general, because there has always been and always will be, hopefully, this other way of doing it. And even the kind of Heiji training is not a cult either. It's a training period that, it does resemble a cult in a lot of ways, but it's fundamentally different. That's my conclusion. So there you go. So, if you want to contribute to my cult of one, that is me, you can go to the URL that you are seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are basically my main means of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, you don't got to donate if you don't want to donate, because this is offered for free. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Sergey, are you begging for food? That's all I'm good for, is to be begged at for food. Oh, look at that.